Timeless 106.1 FM, KFFB, day number 2, and we're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford here on KFFB's Open Mic. And Rick, yesterday we were talking about the wall and some of the things about the immigrants coming in and illegal immigrants. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we can fix this problem.
You know, we have historically spent money and given it to these countries administered through agencies like USAID. That's the Agency for International Development. And almost every country has a USAID footprint that is, present at the embassy or the consulate in that country, and they administer grants for certain things. Now, we need to stop that and rethink about what it is we're investing in and what we get in return. That's not a good use of taxpayer dollars. Think about what we could do if we took a new view of how we curb, we'll call it irregular migration from countries like the Northern Triangle region. What can we do differently? Well, we can start by helping them do judicial reform so that we can incentivize private sector investment to help improve their economic conditions. If you've got a job, you're less likely to leave. And there are all kinds of benefits from this type of policy, one of which needs to happen, it needs to happen quickly, and that is the decoupling of the U.S. economy on the industrial supply side from China. I would like to either reshore or nearshore our industrial base so that we are in a much better position and not reliant on China. We can do that by creating a more favorable economy and a climate to do business in countries that are closer to us, countries like El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And I can tell you, having talked to those heads of state, presidents of those countries, they want to see that happen. And the private sector in those countries want to see that happen. So we need to be encouraging judicial reform so that American companies have a higher degree of comfort to invest in projects in those countries.
What do you see for the days to come? What do you think the role of the Republican Party, which that is our entire delegation, going up against what some call a strong arm tactics where there is no bipartisanism, it's all partisan?
Well, there is no bipartisanship except for bipartisan resistance. I'll give you an example. 2 Democrats voted against the COVID relief bill the first time around when it was sent to the Senate. Joe Manchin said if it didn't have bipartisan support, that he would not vote for it. And then he reversed himself and voted for it. It made it out of the House under reconciliation. It took 51 votes. Ultimately, they got it across. Not a single Republican voted for it. And it came to the House, and 1 Democrat broke ranks and voted against it. So the only agreement we found was 1 Democrat to disagree or to agree with Republicans to step out and say, I can't go along with this $1.9 trillion spending spree. Bipartisanship has been and will continue to be very elusive under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi. I don't know if you've been to the Capitol recently. Ordinarily, I encourage people to come and visit the Capitol, and there's a reason for that. We like having visitors here, and it's something that every American ought to experience at least once in their lifetime, if not more. And we have always stood ready to help lead tours of the Capitol and do everything we can to make our constituents visit to our nation's capital a more pleasant one, a more meaningful one, a more educational one. Right now, the Capitol looks like the Green Zone in Baghdad. It's got fencing all around it with concertina wire and soldiers carrying M4s patrolling, Capitol Police in various locations, and it is not conducive to a visit. In fact, you can't come and visit the Capitol complex under the current conditions. And that's a real shame, because guess what? Spring break's coming up, and that's usually when we get a lot of visitors, and it won't be long before summer starts, and we almost always would have a whole lot of visitors. So, look, I understand last year COVID played a big role in curtailing travel to the Capitol. This year, we're seeing much more freedom of movement, and we're starting to see the numbers trend more favorably. And were it not for this fencing, I would say maybe we could get back to a relatively normal posture here in the Capitol complex and encourage visitors. But it doesn't look like Nancy Pelosi is going to allow that to happen.
That's a question some ask. Why is there a fence around the Capitol, but they want to stop the fence on our borders? That is a good question.
It is a good question, and it's because Nancy Pelosi cares more about protecting her political cronies than she does about protecting you. So she is demonstrating a full commitment to fencing, building a wall around the Capitol, of which she is a denizen, but she's not committed to, nor is Joe Biden, the security of our nation, because they're allowing the border to be violated daily. You know, not only that, this is something that I think every American should be aware of, and certainly my constituents back in Arkansas, that, you know, it's a routine to go through security checkpoints in the Capitol area. You know, from where you're leaving one office building, go through a tunnel, you walk into the Capitol, there's a variety of checkpoints. We have security pins that the Capitol Police recognize, numbered security pins, tightly inventoried. Not everybody can have one. You're a member of Congress, you get one of those pins so that you can walk through security. They acknowledge that. We still do that. But when we get to the Capitol, as we're walking on the floor, we have to go through a magnetometer and be subjected to wanding and anything else before we can go and vote. Nobody else has ever had to go through a magnetometer and be subjected to a wanding before voting, but members of Congress do. Now, you tell me what's wrong with this picture. You know, I was elected to come to Washington and represent my constituents. I should be able to have freedom of movement. I'm entrusted, I serve on the House Intelligence Committee. I'm entrusted with untold numbers of state secrets and a variety of classified information, the trust that's vested in me to be able to have access to that. And yet I can't walk on the Capitol floor without going through a magnetometer and being wanded before I can cast my vote on behalf of the constituents I represent. In fact, she has implemented a rule unilaterally that she will impose a $5,000 fine to any member of Congress who enters the chamber without having been gone through the magnetometer and wanded. If they do that, they're subject to a $5,000 fine on the first offense and $10,000 for every subsequent offense. Now, you can argue that legally she doesn't have the constitutional authority to do that. Clearly, she doesn't have the constitutional authority to do it. But she claims that she can make a rule to do it, and that's her rule. This is all being done at the direction of Speaker of the House. This is not done by the Speaker and the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy. This is not being done by anyone but Speaker Pelosi. And she violated her own rule. She bypassed the magnetometers and came onto the floor without penalty. Parity here, when I'm okay to go down to the skiff and get a classified briefing on any number of topics regarding national security, foreign intelligence, and so on. I'm entrusted with that information. I'm one of 13 members in the House that have access to that information. And yet, and all of us are entrusted with a high degree of access on a variety of different subjects. And I'm not just talking about the Intelligence Committee. I'm talking about any number of committees that you might be a part of. And yet, we still have to go through magnetometers to go and do our constitutional duty to represent our constituents.
We've been talking with Congressman Rick Crawford, and Congressman, and I give you a time to wrap up here on your thoughts of what folks back at home can do.
Well, I can tell you this. I would encourage people to spend as much time enjoying your freedom, your family, and your faith, and do it often, and do it with great joy and great love, and understand that this is America and things are going to get better. But in the end, we know how this story ends. And we may have to endure some hardships between now and then, but I know where I'm headed, and I want my constituents to take some solace in where they can go when this is all said and done. This is a fleeting moment. You know, we're just here for just a little while. And I want people who are listening to my voice right now, you know, to remind your loved ones that you do love them, and remind them how fortunate we are to be living in this blessed nation. And we need to be praying that God continues to keep that hedge of protection around this nation. This nation was founded on godly principles, and I believe through His divine providence. And I honestly believe that we just need to take a minute and look to God and ask for His forgiveness. And I think then He'll restore our land, heal our nation.
We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford here on Timeless 106.1 KFFB's Open Mic. And Congressman, thanks for taking time and talking with us.
My privilege.